And it's really heartfelt to me to introduce this presentation with Fanny and Paula. So I will introduce each of them first. Paula Taher comes from a background of dance. Paula was introduced to authentic movement in 1990. She's a trained Alexander Technique teacher, and from 1993 to 1996, she co-edited a moving journal, an international publication devoted to authentic movement. Her graduate thesis and research focus on the development of the inner witness and can be found on her website. And then Bunny Morrissey came to this work as dance movement therapist and also with a master in clinical psychology. She offers psychotherapy through her private practice of 40 years and teaches both online and in her studio in Vermont. She has published essays in the field of consciousness studies and is currently working on a collection of poems. Both have worked together with Janet Adler since the early of 1990s. They teach ongoing groups in the developing of authentic movement, are faculty members of Circles of Four, which is a postgraduate level program for students who want to teach the practice. They collaborate on many projects and they love to travel together. It's nice. Bonnie and Paula co-edited Janet Adler's recent book, Intimacy in Emptiness, an evolution of embodied consciousness, which was released last year in the fall of 2022. And this is the subject of today's presentation. So I welcome very much both of you. And now it's your turn. Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Karen, for being here with us as our host and for this very warm introduction. We want to thank Tony for envisioning the whole forum, including now the final summit focused on authentic movement. Bonnie and I also want to thank you, Tony, for your enthusiasm and support and for being the one to suggest that our offering today could be a celebration of Janet and the new book. Many thanks also to the really incredible WAEF team for creating this opportunity for so many of us to come together, the global authentic movement community. And thank you, Tina and Heidi and everyone who's here today with helping us with the tech support. And to everyone in China involved in this collaboration. And we absolutely want to thank each of you who are joining us today. Your presence is helping to shape our time together. And finally, to Janet, for all she has offered and continues to offer. Thank you for being here too.
Yes, we understand Janet is with us. She's part of the audience today, and we're honored to have her with us today as someone witnessing our presentation. Thank you. And how great is it that we get to do this on Earth Day? Yes, it's pretty wonderful. It's not lost on us, the significance of this. And we want to begin with blessings on our Earth body, which includes each one of our bodies on this Earth Day. So Paula and I began to prepare for this presentation by thinking about it as a dialogue about our process of editing Janet's new book, Intimacy in Emptiness. What we ended up with is a presentation that we hope is a synthesis of the book. We hope it's a synthesis that basically echoes the arc of how we see Janet's work as an evolution of embodied consciousness. So the presentation will be about 50 minutes long. And then we'll have time for questions and comments, which, like our presentation itself, will be simultaneously translated into Chinese. Many thanks to our translator. And thank you in advance to each of you for your attention today.
Well, we're just going to jump in now because there is so much we want to share with you about Janet's contributions to the wider field of authentic movement and how the focus of her work evolved as its own distinct practice that she calls the discipline of authentic movement. Our intention in compiling Janet's writing was first to respond to a growing interest in preserving her legacy, working with her to gather all of her published essays into one place, including new and unpublished writings, seemed like a useful way to begin. Within this project, our intention was to collaborate with each other, with Janet, and with the mystery and integrity of the work itself, inviting the book to let us know what it wanted to be, inviting the experience of being moved, being guided, really not knowing where it would all lead. Often, Bonnie and I engaged in practice before speaking about each piece of writing. By inviting the discipline into our process, we discovered that being editors was a lot like being movers. We were movers stepping into the unknown, sometimes the two of us and sometimes with Janet, always wondering how to live the practice while committing to the necessary tasks so the project could actually become a book. After immersing in a chronological reading and study of Janet's writing, Bonnie and I understood more fully how and why the discipline of authentic movement developed in its own distinct way. We saw more clearly that Janet's experience of initiation was central to the evolution of the discipline, grounding the work within the mystical traditions, as well as the traditions of healing and dance. Because of this, we decided to devote an early chapter of Intimacy and Emptiness to excerpts from Janet's first book, Arching Backward, in which she writes from within the unfolding of this profound and transformative experience. In our introduction to this chapter, we write, quote, "In the autumn of 1981, preceded by 2 years of increasingly vibrant imagery, Janet's body unexpectedly became the ground and the vessel for a spontaneous flood of powerful energies and visions. Over the next 5 years, an organic and humbling process of inner development ensued, irrevocably changing her life and setting in motion the unfolding evolution of the discipline of authentic movement." End quote. This was an important discovery for us and guided our work. Janet's experience of initiation became more visible to us as a central thread that winds throughout her inquiry, the energy itself informing her questions and guiding her teaching practice.
Now we're going to invite you to listen to Janet's own words regarding this experience, which she shares in an interview with Annie Geisinger in 1998. Janet's here referring to her teaching practice throughout the 1980s and the 1990s. If you wish, feel free to close your eyes and listen inwardly to Janet's words. And I'll pause for a moment after the reading so you might notice how these words move within you. Recently, and with some relief, I realized that in the past 17 years of studio work, I was committing and recommitting in the deepest inward way toward bringing into form the manifestation of what I received within my experience of initiation. I didn't consciously know that the teachings I received in my initiation We're pushing through toward conscious collective embodiment in this world now. Yet in my teaching groups, there were always new and often burning questions. I rarely felt as though I knew how to follow these questions, other than moving blindly but surely into the next chamber, never knowing what we would encounter there. And it had to be we, not me alone, because the embodied discoveries required a circle of beings. Because the teachings were about an individual's relationship to the whole, we needed each other in order to stumble towards embodied wholeness within ourselves as individuals, within our relationships with each other, one by one, within the collective body, and within our individual relationships to the divine. Another discovery Paula and I made was the degree to which Janet's central inquiry was present from the beginning. Before she met and studied with Mary Whitehouse in 1969 and 1970, Janet worked with severely autistic children. Her work as a young dance therapist comes to life in a film she directed called Looking for Me. We've compiled a few excerpts from this film, about 6 minutes of them, which we will share with you now.
The first sense of self is the body sense, awakened by the mother's care. This in turn encourages each child to explore his own body, beginning in infancy and continuing as he grows. This growing consciousness of body awareness is so often crushed as the adult world makes increasing demands on the development of the intellect. The body must not get left behind as a phenomenon, separate and primitive, but instead we must insist that it remain a vital source of all aspects of growing. The awareness of the body's parts and spaces can be intensified in an imaginary experience like body painting. Betsy does not forget even the small, quiet places. The children's solo dances are each a unique expression of what is meaningful to the child that particular moment of that particular day. Rhythm, release, fantasy, self-consciousness, all are part of his opportunity to take a risk and share this moment. Neither Amy nor Deborah had verbal language. Neither child played with toys. Again, like a new infant, neither child had ever experienced a relationship with another human being. Communication was then only possible in one way, through our bodies. By doing what she was doing, I was trying to tell her that I liked her just the way she was, without asking anything of her. I wanted her to know that she was safe to be completely herself. Then when she was ready, we could begin to share. The flat imitation began to fall away as the child permitted me to really move into her world, to share her feelings, though still on a body level. As the distance lessened between us, it became more and more difficult for each child to make the choice between physical contact and autistic isolation. over and over that if I spoke their language, they responded. Each child within the safety of the room and situation had, I think, begun to trust me. Up to now, she had permitted touch, but not enough to relax and become passive like a baby. Both girls were now in the earliest stage of symbiosis and spent most of their time wanting to be held. Perhaps it was at this point that they had begun to experience themselves as one of two people in a relationship and could then begin to grow and go through some crucial phases of normal development which they missed the first time around. For both Deborah and Amy, this was just the beginning. But for the first time, they had each experienced a relationship with another human being. Whether as professionals or as parents, adults who are concerned with the development of a child are continually looking for more effective ways to help them grow. But I think that in order for their help to be more meaningful, not only to the child but to themselves, they must feel comfortable with themselves, with less conflict between their own body language and verbal language, between their intellect and their emotions. These adults were exploring space, the space around themselves, which is really an extension of themselves, and the space in the room, which is really the beginning level of exploring each other. Their eyes were closed not only to lessen the feeling of self-consciousness, but also to remove visual stimuli so that they could really concentrate on the kinesthetic and tactile aspects of these experiences. A moment of nonverbal communication between two people can be a new and often very powerful experience. Self-awareness can be heightened when the movement flow between the partners is mutual and spontaneous. Ideally, no one leads, no one follows.
I'm moved every time I see this video. Beautiful. So when Paula and I reflect on this video, we notice that there are key phrases and concepts that are familiar to us from the practice of the discipline. And they may be familiar to you as well if you practice authentic movement. Here are a few of the phrases that you can ask yourself. We asked ourselves, you can ask yourself if you recognize them. The body must not be left behind. Each detail of movement is important. Growth happens through relationship. Individual choice is crucial. There must be readiness for the next developmental step to occur. More integrity is possible between body language and words. Spontaneity and a free flow of impulse can guide us. And finally, we can develop the courage to take a risk in the presence of others. You'll notice in the excerpts from the films how Janet invites the people who are interacting directly with the children, the social workers, doctors, therapists, and even parents, to have their own parallel experience. She invites them to close their eyes and follow their inner experience through their body. Janet was experimenting with all of this a year or two before she met Mary Whitehouse or knew of her work. Janet's work with autistic children is the precursor to her study of a developmental arc of embodied consciousness, her study of what she comes to call the inner witness, Janet understands from early on how important the personal and psychological inner work is to the development of consciousness.
After completion of her graduate research and work with the autistic children, in the summer of 1969, Janet met and studied first with John Weir, a master psychologist and leader in the human potential movement, and then with Mary Starks Whitehouse that fall and into the spring of 1970. In fact, we learned it is John Weir who first introduces Janet to Mary. What Janet receives from each of these significant teachers turns out to be just what she needs in relation to where her work and questions have brought her. From John, Janet received the experience of feeling deeply seen. It's where she first heard the word witness. John gave Janet essential tools in relation to group process, as well as the importance of a speaking practice. How to articulate embodied experience in a way that stays as close as possible to the actual experience. Speaking from the experience rather than about the experience. And also expressing self-ownership of one's experience by becoming aware of and containing interpretations, projections, and judgments. From John, she receives a nascent and lasting impression of what she later calls witness consciousness. You are the expert of your own experience. This was a phrase Janet learned from John that profoundly informed what evolved in her teaching as the practice of speaking and listening. This is truly a radical statement in service of the development of inner authority and a simple upending of hierarchical power dynamics. With Mary, Janet experienced permission to dive into one's inner world through the body in a safely held way. She received the self-experience of moving and being moved, what Janet came to call mover consciousness. Janet's essay, Speaking the Same Language, is a beautiful tribute to Mary, honoring her legacy. Near the end of the essay, Janet writes that because of Mary, quote, there is something grand living well with an integrity at its roots, growing now across the world, regardless of the psychological, spiritual, or artistic contexts within which it is offered, end quote. 100 years after Mary Whitehouse's birth, this summit is a wonderful example of exactly this. Throughout the 1970s, Janet worked with therapy clients, incorporating the approach to movement that she learned from Mary Whitehouse. By the end of that decade, in her transition from therapist to teacher, we see Janet bringing the therapeutic and developmental aspects of her client work with her, along with much of what she absorbed from John Weir.
Because Janet felt compelled to study, she needed to teach. Thus begins her 40-year teaching practice, within which she continually invites her students to study with her, each student bringing their own questions into the studio work. And so this creates a template for future teachers and students of the discipline. The privilege and excitement of being part of an ongoing participation in collaborative inquiry. The onset of Janet's full-blown experience of initiation coincided in synchronous timing with the opening of her school, the Mary Starks Whitehouse Institute, in 1981. As she begins to teach, Janet gives a name to the form she is teaching, honoring Mary by using the phrase authentic movement, and now newly capitalizing the A and the M. Janet doesn't yet use the term discipline as part of the name of this practice, even though the term has been present as part of her inquiry from the very first paper in 1968, the word discipline appearing in almost every one of her essays. Though she is already experiencing consistent manifestations of energetic phenomena within her own body, she has not yet fully recognized that what she is teaching as a discipline is within the mystical traditions. We see this time, however, as the genesis of the mystical aspect of the discipline of authentic movement, as Janet's questions arise through her own experience. Questions about the body, about the relationship between a mover and a witness, and about experiences inclusive of both personal and also that which is beyond the personal. Her questions lead her to develop a distinct practice that includes both the ritual of moving and witnessing and the ritual of speaking and listening. This practice supports the cultivation of students' embodied consciousness. Their inner witnesses are strengthening as they attend to and articulate both personal and transpersonal content. During the early 1980s, the Mary Starks White House Institute is a laboratory for all of this and more. In the new book, Paula and I introduce readers to the ways in which Janet's previous study of movement help her manage and study her initiatory experiences and also impact her newly developing teaching practice.
Janet's intention in opening the Institute was to invite a group of interns to study with her and to study the process of what she, at that time, called the mover's internal witness, developing within a vessel of relationship with an external witness. Janet's question, "Who is the witness?" becomes the title of her essay published in Contact Quarterly in 1987. This is the first time Janet introduces and names the two roles, mover and witness, in print. In Who is the Witness, we see how Janet's experiences of energetic phenomena inform and shape what arises within her work with the interns. In the following passages, she reflects upon what they were learning. She writes, quote, "We began to notice that there were times when the mover did not seem bound to her personal body. Her energy was not contained there, and the qualities of time, space, and weight were not specific. Those qualities were not felt in relation to the body ego. At these times, there is an experience of no edges, no boundaries. There is a sense of clarity within and without, a feeling literally of no density, no obstruction, no place in the body through which light cannot move. In these situations, the body becomes a vessel through which energy or light can pass unobstructed." And this quote in the same essay, "The psychoanalytic framework began to feel limited, as if we needed a larger form within which we might understand the process. It began to be apparent that the roots of the discipline stretch more broadly than originally conceived. Psychodynamic theories of the ego structure were only one root system. Though much less familiar to me, meditative practice and its roots in Eastern philosophy was another. We have just begun to articulate some of the similarities and differences between authentic movement and meditation." End of quotes. So, Janet in the early 1980s is engaged in a completely unique, in-depth inquiry, studying and tracking the phenomenon of energy as it appears within her own and in her students' embodied experiences. The inclusion of energetic phenomena as an essential, life-infused aspect of our human nature is an important part of the discipline's support of individual development. And right here, we might pause for a moment and silently consider what it might mean in our lives to learn to further articulate such experiences of that which is invisible. What we have no words for and can't speak of, we learn not to recognize. Let's consider for a moment the potential that may arise as we become more able to safely welcome experiences of the numinous, such as light and vibration, into consciousness.
Throughout the 1980s, Janet maps a pathway of individual development. She and her students are learning so much. They are strengthening their capacity to contain and study the phenomenon of projection, judgment, association. They are learning to articulate energetic phenomena as it moves through the body, and so much more. In the early 1990s, Janet's questions concerning the individual's relationship to what she calls the collective body become more prominent. And so she begins working with larger groups, often with 20 or more participants, many of whom commit to multi-year annual retreats. Janet works with these larger groups throughout the 1990s. She and her students study the roles of mover and witness within the collective body, bringing more fluidity to these roles. They study the synchrony and inherent order that tends to arise as energetic phenomena moves through groups. Janet highlights the necessity of maintaining individual consciousness within groups. She writes, "Now our task is to bring consciousness as individuals into a conscious collective." Janet and her students are discovering that with a practice of consistent enough individual consciousness, we can stay in clearer relationship to energies that move through the collective body, allowing healing of the group culture alongside continued personal healing. Janet's whole study of the collective body offers an antidote to our tendencies to merge within groups, so common, so human, an antidote to the loss of individual autonomy and voice. Janet has been and is keenly aware of the dangers of unconscious collectives. In 1992, she names this danger a pressing concern. Now, more than ever, unconscious energies in groups are an urgent concern in our world. Within the discipline of authentic movement, individual work regarding personal history and psychological material is essential and prepares us to enter into a collective body, offering and receiving through our strong enough inner witnesses, while staying consistently conscious of our individuality. This readies us to safely discover something more than individual. Just as energetic phenomena can move through individual bodies, it can also move through groups and may become palpable, audible, visible to members of the group. The group may begin to be experienced as a symbiotic and synergistic whole. In the following video clip, which we're going to show you now, it's a short one, about 2.5 minutes. It's from an online conversation hosted by the San Francisco Zen Center in 2021. And Janet speaks about the importance of individual development in preparation for entering the collective body.
In the discipline of authentic movement, it's a blessing if an individual can really be seen enough just by one witness, long enough for whatever that means, so that their inner witness is compassionate enough to hold all that is necessary to hold and be in dialogue with when necessary, to be a part of the whole. Because when we enter the collective body, it's not only some of the risks that we have learned about in our individual work with our teacher inform us and strengthen us to actually risk being seen by many who are witnesses, other movers. The other movers might be touching us, they might be making sounds. How can we actually bring this little self that we've been working so hard to hold correctly and lovingly enough into the whole? It feels so risky. Like you say, all the judgments and projections and all the things we just automatically do when we see another person, not let alone when we see ourselves. So it's very, there's a tension there of entering the emptiness when there's so many others in the Sangha and in the studio practice, in the collective body. And we even risk the possibility of our personality challenges being so softened in one moment, perhaps, that there's more room for us to actually be met by a light or a vibration, or actually an experience of unitive consciousness because of the whole. Again, all of it is because of the other. I am who I am because of you, whoever you are.
As you may glean from this recording, Janet finds ways to weave two threads: psychological development and openness to energetic phenomena into a relational practice, orienting one toward the development of embodied consciousness, without ignoring personal content that may emerge at any time in one's development. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Janet turns to smaller groups in order to bring more focus to the details of students' experiences, including sometimes energetic phenomena. Janet learns to guide and support the preparation and strengthening of the inner capacity, the inner witness, to be in relationship with that which is unseen. We could say, with that which is seeking to be known. Janet and her students begin to commit more fully to what emerged as specific roles within the ritual practice: mover, silent witness, speaking witness. The silent witness role can serve as a kind of bridge between the roles of mover and speaking witness. Joining the witness circle without the responsibility of offering verbal witnessing offers the freedom and opportunity to come into more conscious relationship with one's own processes of perception, including projections and other content that may arise in the presence of movers. Janet continually encouraged students to deepen into their own embodied felt sense experience, asking the question, how do you know what you know? How do we recognize our embodied experience of energetic phenomena, of intuition, of direct experience? And how do we speak from these experiences, bringing consciousness through our bodies and into the collective body? In tracking and speaking from within more exacting details of their experience, students learn to descend deeper beneath narrative, to study the phenomenon of direct experience and how it may lead to or coincide with intuitive knowing or clear silent awareness, quite distinct from the imaginal or any sort of associative material and content. In her essay, From Seeing to Knowing, published in 2005, Janet makes a clear distinction between the imaginal and intuitive realms. It really is a radical evolution when, after long practice, Janet suggests we no longer focus on content, but instead dive more deeply and directly into the phenomena of embodied experience itself, discerning more closely what is personal from what is beyond personal, and learning to articulate in new ways that which is invisible, subtle, or even beyond words. In doing so, Janet guides us to open further to the mystical elements of the practice.
And now we want to invite you to either sit or stand and simply feel for a moment into an experience of each of us as individuals here today, together creating a very specific wholeness, our very own collective body. Here we are. Maybe you'd like to spread your arms in order to sense our connection. Maybe you'd like to keep your eyes open, or maybe you'd like to close your eyes and simply feel into the group experience for a moment. All of these words today, ours and Janet's, as they move within you, as your own energy moves within you, everything you brought here today, everything you came with, your life, your world, and now here in this setting. What is your experience of our circle right now? We invite you to ask yourself in a very personal way, how is this work an evolution of embodied consciousness? Might you access an experience of this in some way right now? How is this work an evolution of embodied consciousness? And I'll be silent for a moment now. We are in a circle that stretches as wide as the world. We sit and stand on the edge of mystery, never knowing what comes next, in continuing relationship to the unknown. In our collective body work, especially in our work and teaching on Zoom, it is becoming more apparent to many of us that being together in these circles with others across large distances of time and space, we are palpably connected on the sphere of our planet. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation thus far. You have generously brought your interest in authentic movement here to this wide circle of participants today.
Soon we will invite your questions, but first we want to complete our task of tracking the development of the discipline of authentic movement and tracking Janet's inquiry, which became the study of an evolution of embodied consciousness. In the second decade of the 2000s, Janet's evolving inquiry leads her to study within her teaching practice the phenomenon of emptiness. So I want to just share. So during this time, Janet envisioned a living, vital, geometric shape filled with emptiness. And so this shape is what she saw. She didn't yet have a name for this shape, but later found it within sacred geometry. Mandorla, the shape and name already present within ancient wisdom traditions. Perhaps Janet's study of emptiness brought forth the vision of the mandorla as a form, a shape that emerges from emptiness and is filled with emptiness. What we do know is that Janet begins to see the template of the discipline of authentic movement within this shape. So this template and what Janet began to see as the full picture of the discipline of authentic movement is that it offers a model for a developmental pathway for students now and into the future. So here in this image, we see what Janet saw, the full picture of embodied consciousness evolving within and through the relationship between mover and witness. So the upper two lines of the mandorla, where you see mover and inner witness, and beautifully, this is all translated into Chinese. The upper two lines represent a mover's journey over time through a series of developmental roles. And you'll see the roles, moving witness, silent witness, kind of arcing up and over the top toward empty mover, empty witness. A series of developmental roles from mover consciousness, where beginning over on the left, where it says mover and witness, and you see the number 2, all the way to witness consciousness, this whole second half of the mandorla, where coming to a place of mover witness, where the mover and the witness are not experienced as separate. So each mover's timing and pathway is completely unique, of course, and not always linear. So the template, as I was just saying, also shows the arc of a trajectory from dual states of consciousness to unitive states of consciousness that can become more available as the inner witness develops.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. What Janet has offered, is intimately connected to many other paths of development of consciousness. Yet it is also something completely new in the world, a new and contemporary mystical practice. non-denominational, an embodied awareness practice that is utterly specific in its focus on individual development of embodied consciousness and how this can open to embodied consciousness within groups. The final piece of Janet's work has everything to do with how we cross the threshold of our protected studio spaces, the places where we safely practice, and bring what we have cultivated in our practice into the world. How daunting. No matter how much inner work we have done, so much for many of us, there is this moment when we need to cross the threshold, where the rubber meets the road, when we are confronted with the pleasures and irritations, the joys and hardships, the wonders and the horrors of what we confront each day in our daily lives. Are there new forms of intelligence that wish to move through our conscious enough collective bodies and into the world? Out from the emptiness of the sacred space within our studios, out from the emptiness of the mandorla, out from these experiences of energetic phenomena, divinity, light, and vibration, out from experiences of unitive consciousness within our beloved collective body work, crossing the threshold. How do we find pathways so that new and healing energies might enter our world, bringing consciousness and healing? How do such healing energies become available, not just to the few of us who are privileged to do this work, but to a whole world full of so much suffering? We are learning about this within a collaborative process. We know we need each other in order to receive and channel these creative energies. Because of the maturing and strengthening of each of our inner witnesses, and because of each other, we may discover such pathways. For the two of us, Paula and me, one small piece of this work has been our wish to preserve Janet's legacy, our wish to bring awareness of a fully formed practice, the discipline of authentic movement, to the larger world, and a desire to place this work now in relation to other paths and knowledge streams within the field of consciousness studies.
Tomorrow, we have the great good fortune of having Janet here to speak with us from her own continuing inquiry regarding how we may invite consciousness into the world through the phenomenon of forgiveness. Her talk begins at 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 9 p.m. Beijing time. We are utterly grateful today for your interest and for your participation and for the ways each of you is engaged in your own attempts to invite consciousness into and through your own bodies, into your lives, and into the world, in the supermarket, in our homes, in our civic participation, in our work and play. May we support each other's efforts. May compassion and insight increase in the world. May suffering ease.
There is something much larger than any of us, an energy that we can learn to tap into, an energy we can prepare ourselves to channel for the benefit of all beings. To the mystery of this energy and to its wisdom, we bow. Perhaps being part of this collective body here today may inspire some of us to turn towards the joys and sufferings of the world in new ways. May the energy of our inner work, may the development of the inner witness continue to ripen within each one of us, and may each of your paths be blessed. Thank you so, so much for listening, for your attention. And now we're going to open for you to ask questions, make comments. We want to turn this into a bit of a dialogue between Paula and I and you. And so we're going to open the chat to questions and comments. Feel free to post anything in the chat so we can all see and notice themes and hear what's moving in the collective body of participants here today. And if you want to actually speak and have a dialogue with us, raise your virtual hand. And does everybody know how to do that? And our host, Karen, will ask some people to speak. And if you do speak, we just ask you to please be relatively brief, as we have limited time and want to hear from as many of you as we can. So I guess we have about 15 minutes, and it will end about 5 minutes before the hour. And then after we end, for any of you who would like to stay, there will be a brief book raffle. I think it's just a 5-minute thing, hosted by WAEF, with a drawing of 2 free copies of Janet's new book. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Bonnie and Paula, being your host. I want to thank you first, and it has been very touching, really, like your so careful way of, I feel that I was being kind of leading through all of Janet, searching and path through all those moments, and memories also came to my mind, and it was done in such a very careful way that it was very touching, and at the same time feeling how what it came at the end was already present. Those seeds were already present at the beginning. Reminds me of T.S. Eliot poem also, and I have that movement all the time. But you do it in because it's very difficult to find words sometimes to express something that is so deep, and sometimes for which we don't have words. So I really feel a lot of gratitude for what you did. So now, yeah, the dialogue is open, and if there are comments on the chat, I can look at it, and if someone wants to say something, just raise their hands or put their hands in the window.
Karen, I'd love to know the poem if you have it, if you want to post it there or post it afterwards, or
well, I can look at it's 4 quartets. It's in 4 quartets of T.S. Eliot. It just came to my mind. I have to go look if I have the book and if I found it, and then I send it to. Yeah.
Thank you.
And you're speaking of this, Karen, and I really feel it, like that movement you bring to us. It's so much what Bonnie and I felt. We called it. We kept saying that it feels like that ancient sense of the Ouroboros, where the serpent whose tail is in its mouth, and the end is in the beginning. And it was such a very powerful sense for us throughout the book. And it actually very a little bit, we just talked a lot about how to sequence it. Like how do you, a book is in such a linear form. How do we capture some of that feeling of the end being in the beginning? So I'm so glad you named this.
But you did it, and I think it's like an open Ouroboros, because always in that round it brings something new,
Yes.
and it remains open. So that is very powerful. And
I see a question here about elaborating more on the collective consciousness, on the dangers of the collective. And
yeah,
I would say that perhaps the unconsciousness within collective bodies and how to deal with that. Bonnie, do you have some thoughts about that?
Oh,
You and I have spoken about this quite a bit.
yeah. Sometimes Janet talks about fear being at the base of the pelvis. And this is what comes to mind when I think about this. And I think about how fears get going in groups, and how they can be kind of like a fire can be set under the fears that then really intensifies the fear, and that often what people do to protect themselves from fears, at least in the culture that I work in the Western culture, the United States of America, as a psychologist, a lot of times when we're trying to protect ourselves from fear, we go to anger. And so then when angers get going in a group, there can be all sorts of really intense attitudes, projections, judgments that come up and really start to flame into something big. And then when actions and words are set to these intensities, I think we see many examples. I think I'm trying not to name them, but so many fundamentalist tendencies and enraged responses to that come, I think, from a sense of fear. And I think these have been for a long, long time, back to witch burnings, to burning women who were healers and just so many through history. It's just a human tendency to target the people that frighten us. And so that's what I think of. Do you have thoughts, Paula?
Yeah, all I would add to what you're saying, Bonnie, is that it's like what everything you're saying helps us see why it is so important that we so much of what can offer us in practices, particularly in embodied practices, because if we can't feel, if we're unconscious of that, what is driving our impulses, what is driving our actions and our speaking is anger or fear, then we are, that's the unconsciousness. The invitation to consciousness is to feel in our bodies that fear, to come into some kind of relationship, to tend to what is our own experience. And then here's that place of really coming to engage our own inquiry around projection and assumptions about who the other is.
Nice. If I notice my own fear when it comes up, if I notice my own anger when it comes up, I can come into relationship with it. I can name it. I can work with it. And we can do this within groups as well.
Yeah, and in that place of consciousness, maybe then there's a choice. Maybe I can choose to contain and not follow that impulse that is that sprouts from the emotion. And yeah, so yeah, wonderful question. Thank you.
There's another question here, which I love. It's, what is emptiness? How is it feeling? Paradoxically, for me, this state or space of true emptiness is a very charged and filled. I love this question, and it makes me want to like hold the question together. Basically, this feels to me like an ongoing inquiry in my life. I love the question, what is emptiness? I want to live with the question every day. What is emptiness? What is emptiness? What is emptiness today? And the whole experiences of emptiness being filled is a paradox. And yet I feel for myself as well that this is very true in my experience. Yeah, and then I see Helen's response here. In my experience, emptiness is when I do not identify with the content. And so that's an interesting response, sort of what we were talking about when Janet is asking students to let go a little more of the content and go beneath it. And then what's here when we let go of the content. Yeah, Paula,
I just wanted to, what you're saying reminds me or brings up the sense of the spaces that we work in, that before a mover closes their eyes and we're just in this empty space, not knowing what's going to happen, there's something about that emptiness of the space that it resonates, or really feels like a call toward a kind of emptiness within ourselves, that an inner space, or embodying a kind of emptiness in relation to all that we don't know, all that might possibly, it's like the potency. That's for me so much of what the feeling or the feeling of fullness and aliveness is, the potency of what might arise or fill that emptiness, and then it subsides again. It empties, emptiness empties again. And then, and every time we move, there's that, like, we don't know what's going to happen, and it's never the same experience.
Right. Always
witness.
New. Yeah. I want to name Gay Watson's beautiful little book. What's it called? Is it just called Emptiness, Paula?
Is it A Philosophy of Emptiness?
A Philosophy of Emptiness. Really beautiful little book if you're interested in reading it.
So we have about 2 more minutes.
Yeah, I like this too. Can you give an example of a newly emerging energy that you have experienced arising as a collective comes into attunement with itself? Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to me is what we were saying in this conversation, this presentation today about as we've been working more online and sometimes with bigger groups, that we've done some online, practice of a sort, and there has been this very organic developing sense in me, and I think in others, of kind of a palpable experience of being on a sphere together. It's almost like the circle in the studio has turned into or organically shifted, transformed to the sphere of our earth, which is when I experience this directly, it's very exciting to me, because it is embodied consciousness working its way into the world. There are also other experiences in collective bodies in studios where it feels like there is enough consciousness that I, have had experiences that are pretty hard to name, but they do feel like a kind of, the best word I can find for it is a kind of intelligence that feels new, that has entered into the group, that has entered into the collective body, that is moving within the collective body. And it can be experienced in different ways by different people. I once, a couple of years ago, had an experience of kind of the transparency of another mover's body, so that my experience in that moment was of being able to see her very clearly, and also see right through her to the windows and the greenery behind her. It's just a tiny example of a manifestation, like a symptom almost, of what this energy started to feel like in my body. Do you have any other thoughts about this, Paula? It's really interesting question to me.
Yeah, it also leads me to what we were talking about earlier of this threshold place where we are in the world. We are in our work and collaborative, whatever we're doing with other people, where I feel like what we're learning in the practice is something that we may find coming into our work, where a kind of, maybe it feels connected to intuition. It feels connected to the way one person may say something, and then another person picks it. It stirs something in another person, and then it's like something comes into form. So what we're experiencing in the studio, I think that's part of what I see as an intelligence that is perhaps becoming more available to, as there is enough inner witness presence and sense of collaborating and participating in something more than our own individual intentions or our own individual sense of work. So I know this is happening for me. It's almost like a rethinking of what work is and how it gets done, and maybe less and more feeling that less of me is required, that what's required is for me to open and empty more, so that I can participate in a way that something moves through me that's not just mine. So that's what I want to add.
Thank you. And what a perfect segue, because I have experienced this with you, Paula, so intimately, the ways in which we imagine working together, and then how the work arrives and enters us and takes us on a journey that we hadn't expected. And sometimes, or some elements of the journey have been just so joyous and sometimes effortless, actually. And
Sometimes a lot of work.
Sometimes a lot of work, true, and sometimes effortless.
Yeah. And there are more comments there if you want to see Paula and Bonnie. But I think it's time.
Yeah. So we wanted to just close with a short ritual. And if you have a candle, we invite you to hold it up, or and maybe you want to go into gallery view again, so we can see each other individually and as one big collective body spanning the earth. So yes, if you have a candle, you could hold it up, or if you like, an object or a hand gesture, or just be present yourself. And let's take a moment of silence as we close, feeling ourselves present, letting ourselves see and be seen.